and welcome back to the 52-week photo challenge. This week we're gonna do things a little bit different. I wanna talk about the assignment at the beginning of the video, and then we're gonna talk about your guys' photos from last week right after that. I'm really excited about this week. We're gonna kind of tie together the exposure triangle, which we started talking about last week with Aperture. If you didn't watch that video, it will be a link below. Go and check that out. So this week we're covering sort of two topics, and they're pretty complex, but I just want to sort of scratch the surface a little bit and I want to try to explain it in a way that maybe you've never heard it before. This week's assignment is going to be focusing on shutter speed and ISO. ISO, it didn't make the title. Whenever I try to start explaining someone how photography works, like when they're just starting out, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, those are usually the three things that I usually talk about first, which I've learned actually it's better to talk about composition first. What is shutter speed and what is ISO? So shutter speed, what that's gonna be is last week we talked about aperture, which is how wide the shutter opens. Shutter speed is how fast the shutter opens, believe it or not. While ISO, it measures the sensitivity of your image sensor, or back in the day when you're shooting film, it measured your film speed. And what ISO does is the capability of giving your image more light. But with that, like everything in photography, there's always give and take. You're gonna be compromising on sharpness. You're gonna get a lot more noise and grain. We're gonna get into that. Last week I drew this picture up. This right here on the screen, I'll slide over so make some room for it. This is called the exposure triangle, and the one that I made, it was a rough draft. So what the exposure triangle is it's pretty laid out of the give and take of what's happening with your camera and how to balance light using these different settings to get a proper exposure, to get the camera to do what you want to do. So to help further understand the exposure triangle, I have made here a crude model of roughly how this works. So last week we were focusing on aperture. Now, the exposure triangle is broken down into three separate components of exposure: your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. Aperture is how wide the shutter opens. Shutter speed is how fast the shutter opens. ISO is the film speed. Just to put it really rough, it'll let more light in, but then the higher ISO you go, like the brighter it'll be, so it's good for low light. But the problem is what you're compromising there with higher ISOs is you're gonna get a lot more grain, a lot more noise in your images. So you're gonna wanna usually shoot, depending on your camera, probably anything under 1600, unless you absolutely have to go up. But anyways, here is how this works. Now, if you're shooting full manual, any one of these that you adjust is going to have a reaction on the other two. Now, the only difference is in shooting manual, it's not gonna compensate for you. So instead, you're gonna get a darker image or a brighter image depending on which one of these that you mess with and which direction you mess with them. Say you're shooting something really fast and you need a really fast shutter speed so you can capture the movement. In manual mode, this would slide down to here and these wouldn't move, and you would just get a darker image most likely. And the reason is because these didn't move to compensate for what you're trying to do. Now, if you understood this and you said you needed to move to 500th of a second, you would move your shutter speed down, but then you would know to stop down to let more light into the camera. And by letting more light into the camera this way, you might be able to mess with your ISOs and maybe even bring those down a little bit to get an even sharper image. The funny thing about this is every time ISO isn't gonna matter. Like some days, if you're shooting outside, you can pretty much leave this on either 400, or if you're exclusively outside and it's really bright, you can even leave it on 100 or whatever your camera shoots natively. And then you can kind of just mess with these two and just slide these two back and forth and then base that around your exposure. But the beautiful thing is, if I'm being honest, I never shoot manual mode because it's 2018 and there's technology that accommodates for this. So when you see TV, like we're talking about this week, on your camera, that is shutter priority. When you see AV, that's aperture priority. So what that means is when you have your camera on that selected mode, all you're gonna be controlling is your f-stops if you're on aperture. So say you wanted more light into the camera, or maybe you wanted to isolate your subject and have that nice bokeh around your image. So you're gonna drop that down to f2.8, and to compensate for that, your shutter speed is gonna need to be higher so your image isn't blown out. Let's say you're shooting a landscape and you really need everything to be in focus. So what you're gonna do here is you're gonna bring your aperture up to maybe an f11 or f22, but then your shutter's gonna have to be open longer to compensate for how small it's open. Gotcha. And the same goes when you have it on shutter priority. So what shutter priority is gonna do is, again, say maybe you're shooting wildlife and you don't wanna capture any movement. You want everything in the frame to be nice and crisp and not blurry. So you're gonna want a faster shutter speed. So what that's gonna do, that's automatically gonna adjust your ISO and your aperture, while you can just focus on the effect you're trying to get, whether it be your shutter speed or your aperture. So for me, I'm always going back and forth. And that's that. I think it's cool. Like these little settings on the top of your camera. Now you know what those are for. And honestly, I never shoot manual. I rarely shoot manual, and the reason being is because it's really not necessary, especially if you're out and you're just run and gun. A lot of times, certain things are happening around you and they're happening so fast that you don't have time to fart around with your settings. For example, if I'm shooting on like a faster lens, like a 1.8, where it really has that bokeh, that shallow depth of field that we were talking about last week, and I'm walking around and that's sort of my focus, then maybe I'll just have it set to aperture priority, and then I'll just control the f-stops from there. So that way when I go ahead and shoot, all I'm doing is practically manipulating the depth of field, while the shutter speed will tend to follow. Because like I said, I mean, sometimes I'll just have the ISO set depending on the day and the conditions, if I'm outside, if I'm inside. So usually I don't like that jumping around too much, so I'll manually set that beforehand. So the way that I personally like to shoot is just having the aperture and shutter speed sort of adjusting. So then say I'm shooting maybe a shot where I want everything in focus, I'll go up to maybe an f14, take the shot, and then say I walk a few more feet and hey, maybe there's this guy playing a guitar. I'm gonna drop that down and I wanna isolate him from the subject. Bang, took the shot. Too quick. Time is money in photography. Because again, to me, it's more important getting the frame, the image, because that's what the people see. That's what people who see your photography, I mean, you can be technical and be like, well, if I shoot that, you're gonna have to focus and get the meter rating and be like, oh, well then I'm gonna have to drop the shutter speed down to, it's just so much time. It's extra time versus I could get however many shots off before you've even taken one. But at the same time, I'm not exclusively shooting on aperture mode. I went back and forth a lot of these when we were in London. A lot of these pictures that you're gonna see, I took while either in aperture mode or with shutter speed priority. For instance, London is known for these iconic taxis, the black cabs, and the buses. So with that, I thought it'd be a really cool effect to capture movement by shooting aperture priority and actually shooting at a lower shutter speed. So what I would do to get this little effect, here's a little tip. What you have to do is you have to stay really, really still, but at the same time, you have to create movement. So say, for instance, like this picture here, I was taking a picture of this black cab. What I had to do was I followed the black cab the same speed with my camera, but then right when it got to the spot where I wanted it, I snapped off the picture while moving, but maintaining very steady, because what that does is it'll keep your object in focus, because if you're matching the speed that he's moving in the camera, it's not gonna pick up that it's moving, but everything around it creates this blur. It's really, really cool. It's a cool effect. And that's not created with aperture. So that's just one example of how you can use shutter speed for your creative vision to get sort of a different effect than just the same photos every time. Another example that we're gonna have a whole night photography week here, but light trails. We're not gonna go over that too much today, but what light trails are is you just leave the shutter open for, I don't know, maybe a second, maybe 4 seconds, but with that, you're gonna have to drop your ISO like crazy, and you're going to have to maybe raise your f-stop. I could go all day on that, but that's just another example of why you'd wanna shoot shutter priority. And I think the way that I really wanna go about it, I don't know, I'm not a certified photography teacher. I'm telling you things the way that I see them, and it works for me, so I know that it can work for people. There's gonna be people who preach and tell you you're not a photographer if you don't shoot manual. I think that's stupid. If you shoot manual, great, I think that's awesome. It doesn't work for me. To me, what's important is in front of me, not what's on my camera. Like when I'm shooting in these modes, if I'm focusing as the composition as a whole, if I know what I want to achieve, I'm gonna basically, if I was shooting manual, I would be following up with the exact same settings that the camera's already programmed to do. Especially since on top of that, you can shoot underexposed or overexposed, like your exposure compensation. A lot of times cameras, you can adjust that on the fly as well. So it's like, we've come too far to stick in our old ways. But an exception to this, to shooting full manual, and just so you kind of understand the exposure triangle a little bit better, is maybe if you're shooting studio stuff, or if you're like camped out or shooting a project for somebody maybe, and they just need pure consistency across all of their pictures, that's when you're gonna shoot full manual. And when it's sort of like a slower paced workflow. At least for me, that's what I do. So this week, try to use shutter priority to your advantage. That might be a really, really slow shutter speed, or maybe like you capture like a hummingbird or something that just moves so fast, but then it's crystal clear. Or if you shoot sports, maybe you're shooting hockey is a really cool one. Really, the possibilities are endless, and we're just kind of scratching the surface here. I just wanted to introduce you guys to these techniques, as we're gonna talk about them later on moving forward. So check out the link below. This week we're gonna be using #TribeWeek7 and post those to Instagram, and then we'll be reviewing those next Monday. Now let's go back here and talk about Tribe Week 6, where we talked about aperture priority. You guys used the #TribeWeek6 on Instagram and posted your photos there, and like every week, we're just gonna dive into it. I like what we did last week, where I could show more photos at one time, especially since this one doesn't require me to really get in there. And so we're just gonna go through and look through these. Last week I thought I had my cursor showing and I didn't. Ha! So let's just get right into it. All right, I don't even know where to begin. These are all awesome. A lot of people had this idea to show the camera or the phone. I thought that's cool. Seeing the picture within like the frame of the camera, it's really interesting. I didn't like that one. I like that one. Yeah, it's cool. It's soft. I can just look at it all day. Not much more needs to be said about that. This is a really good portrait. Didn't like that one either. This is where shallow depth of field really comes into play to people's advantage, just because this is done at night. It's a lot of low light, and also it separates the subject from the background. If you were to use a higher f-stop and all of this is in focus, it's gonna take away a lot from the portrait. That was a perfect use of it and an awesome photo. Again, these pictures are really cool. I think that's awesome. Let's see. This is really cool because this could be used as a storytelling technique, sort of what we were talking about the other weeks with, the negative space, and when we were talking about telling a story. This is at a coffee shop. One of the most interesting things to me is seeing like what people carry on a daily basis. But I just think it's cool, like the items that people are like, I have to have these with me. I think it says a lot about a person. And here, this looks like it's either maybe a wallet or a notebook with the glasses and the coffee. It's a really well edited, a really good processed image. The framing's really nice, and I think it's cool. And the use of a shallow depth of field here really highlights these pieces and makes them seem more important. By highlighting them, it makes them pop out from the background a little bit more, and they're just these everyday items that it gives it sort of it makes you stop and look at it a little bit more. That was a really sweet photo. This picture is really cool as a frame within a frame, and I really like the way that you can see, oh, as I'm saying this, I know what happened. Okay, so this girl right here that's in the trunk, she's the same distance away from this mirror that this car is. I was gonna say, it's not possible. You can't possibly do it. I was gonna say have this maybe have this out of focus, but you can't because she's focused on this girl, which that distance is the same. That's so cool because the mirror here is actually out of focus. If you were to focus on the mirror, then everything else would be out of focus. Oh wow, that's cool. That's really kind of a thinker with great, oh, that's cool. That one's cool. I like this just because it's a little bit different. What is happening? I like this one because it's this take of this picture. I like when people get pictures of these monuments or things that a lot of people have pictures of, and they make them a little bit different. You use an f5.6 here, but the thing is that's so far away, this bridge, I believe that's the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. It's so far away that the 5.6 makes it very bokeh, and it's really cool. So like the driver in the car, it's awesome. That one's cool because it's just Scrabble. It's awesome. This one's really awesome. This is shot at an f4. I'm assuming with sort of a telephoto lens because it looks like they're at a subway, and they're on the underground, it looks like, maybe in London. The stroller there in focus, and I could go back, all the leading lines, everything that leads, the vignette here, the framing that leads you into the picture, it's really good. That's cool, really cool actually. That one's pretty cool. This one looks really good. I love this, the shallow depth of field, focused right on the eye. This is a perfect example of using that. Oh my gosh, that's a 5.6 here, guys. That's crazy. I would think that that's like a 1.8 or a 1.4 with maybe a 50 millimeter and 85. He shot at 300 millimeters with a 5.6. Look at how creamy that is. That's awesome. It's another example of just using that long focal length. Another awesome portrait. I love this tones. Really, really cool portrait. And then let's see. I like that one. I like that one a lot. All these are sweet. If you have a second, just go through. That's another cool one of the Bay Bridge. A lot of San Francisco. I don't know if that's the same person. I think it is. Go through and look at these pictures and see what these people are doing to make these photos pop. Using Aperture, just being conscious of what aperture you're shooting on to get these effects. That's a really cool picture. I think that's gonna be it. I think that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, this photo is your photo of the week. Reason being is because it's this old medium format camera. He's shooting at a 2.8. It's sort of a bokeh inception. Right here, this is your aperture ring on your camera. And then you look down to see if your exposure's ready. And then with that, you snap the picture. He's got, what's he got in focus? It looks like a door. Maybe outside, but the colors, even in his exposure on his camera, it looks good. It's a really interesting picture. It's cool because the tripod is out of focus, so your attention doesn't need to go there, but all the while it has the leading lines leading you into the image, which is here. He focuses of the viewfinder of the medium format camera. That's awesome. That's really cool. And I feel like it wraps up exactly what we've talked about this week. So Sean, thank you for being this week's featured photo of the week, and keep posting. Again, guys, keep posting using the hashtag on Instagram, and then you could be featured as the photo of the week. Really, really awesome stuff this week, guys. Go through and look at all these. These are, it's hard to put it into a quick 10 to 15 minute video of all these different look at the backlighting there on top of just the composition itself. That's really cool. It's really good stuff. It's really cool to be able to click around on here and get inspiration from all of you guys that are posting. Here, Molly shot at 4 seconds. That's gonna, sweet. Do that this week. Perfect example of shutter speed, leaving that shutter open. Just to wrap up here, this is a perfect example to leave that shutter open, and look what she did with it. Wow, sorry, this is super out of order, but that's a very good picture. Using the glass as a divider and okay, that's it. I need to make extended versions of these videos. So good luck, guys, and we'll see you guys next Monday.